So where we really left off last class, we were spending time talking about some of the different meanings of Eucharist. And today we're going to talk about one more of those meanings of Eucharist and see how it's a springboard to launch us into other conversations, particularly what you'll explore in the next article you read on your own. One of the really crucial aspects of communion that is very much steeped in Dominican history, in Dominican spirituality, is this idea of Eucharist as a call to social justice, that there's this missional component that you can't tease out. This really is popularized by a Dominican, Bartolome de las Casas. He comes to us from 1514, so a long time ago. And de las Casas joined the Catholic European missionaries who came to the Americas. So as we know, a lot of missionary activity was a vehicle for colonization. And at least on that surface level, there is this air of optimism, excitement, this type of religious sincerity that they really believed how important it was to share the love of God, to introduce Jesus to indigenous populations, that more people could be saved, could go to heaven, that more people could be blessed. Obviously, as we know how history turns out, a lot of oppression, violence, all of the really negative effects of imperialism ensue. And de las Casas witnesses this firsthand. He's really frustrated with how the Roman Catholic Church is complicit in these dehumanizing enterprises. And he's repulsed especially by the Roman Catholics' practice of enslaving Native peoples. So much so, he reaches out to the Pope. He's going to write to the Pope and advocate for an official Roman Catholic stance on rejecting slavery. And another injustice among many that is happening in these kind of American colonies is if an indigenous person does convert to Catholicism, they certainly would not be able to become a priest. And so that's another component that de las Casas is going to champion and pave the way for indigenous peoples to be clergy as well. And the way de las Casas thinks about this challenge, right? Thinks about this call to serve all these peoples is through his spiritual experiences of Eucharist. He's going to use the Eucharist to come to a lot of these social justice ends. He's going to say, you know what? The church is actually being quite hypocritical that as we European Catholics are partaking in a meal, right? We're ritualizing mealtime, and we get to feast when people outside those doors are starving, right? Like there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect when we get to kind of be in this moment, this sacred space, and we're praying to God, thank you, God, for providing. And outside, there's hunger. So he wants the Eucharist to help us think through feeding ministries. And there's another component to it. The bread which we eat. And of course, this is like pre-wafer life, right? Where it's actual loaf of bread. Who made this bread? But the laborers, enslaved laborers. It's one thing to say God provides, but let's be real. What is being provided is built on the backs of another group of people. And there's something really powerful about the symbolism of bread that prompts us to think about laborers in general. Because God didn't say for the Eucharist, oh, and eat the grape, take and eat the apple, take and eat whatever instantly grows out of God's creation, right? There's something about bread that comes into existence because of human right? Human collaboration with God. And this is so crucial. The Mass today uses language, right? The priest is going to say words to that effect. Thank you for that which has been brought about by human hands. So humans get involved in the blessing. It wouldn't be made possible without human effort. So again, when we think about all the things we could possibly think about during communion, we could reflect on where is this coming from. So all of this is to say that because Eucharist has this justice component, that's really an invitation for us to think about marginalized experiences in general. How can we connect the Eucharist with those out in the world? So our next article is going to be an African feminist perspective of Eucharist. I hope, right? I hope it goes without saying that the author is drawing upon her experience. She is not in any way presuming to represent the African experience. It's a perspective. And what she's really acknowledging is something that Father Eduardo Fernandez also was doing, in that all of this is to say scholarship, the way I read the Bible, the way I interpret liturgy, is through my experience. It's through my world lens. The other way that she approaches Bible and liturgy is through this feminist lens. I think there's a lot of different definitions out there of feminist or feminism, a lot of baggage, a lot of negative stereotypes. So it might be helpful to get on the same page. What does it mean to be a feminist? We don't need a comprehensive response. What does a feminist advocate for? Right, so this is really interesting. Now, there's something about wanting a sense of equality, but we want to nuance that today. Certainly with early waves of feminism, you're going to see people with their poster boards like equality, equality. Today, the buzzword is more about equity, right? Equality is saying, I want the same as you. I want to be treated exactly the same. Equity emphasizes that we might need different resources. So if I think about the world of healthcare, I don't need the exact same medical treatment as you. I need to go to a specialist who knows like my body parts. You know what I'm saying? And you don't need to see that person, right? So equity is about getting the resources for someone to be healthy and flourish. But it's not about sameness. And that is an idea that Lilian, the author, is going to play around with. I'll share the most watered down, kind of bare bones, common denominator definition of feminism. It might be helpful for your notes. A feminist simply cares about women's experiences, right? Just cares about women's stories and cares about her well-being, her flourishing. Now, what that looks like is going to drastically vary. A lot of feminists will butt heads with one another, right? Women don't agree. Feminists will debate whether or not men can call themselves feminists, right? So there's so many fault lines that it really is not one thing, but a bare commitment to just care. I will say, to share a bit more about certain trends in general, right? In general, usually feminist scholarship tends to enshrine specifically white women's experiences. If I think about North African feminist scholars and theologians, European, a lot of famous ones are coming out of France. we tend to make the mistake, when I say we, I'm like saying white women, tend to make the mistake of universalizing our experience, that somehow my experience as a woman is the experience all women have, and that's just not true, right? Women are also quite diverse and have different struggles and obstacles and joys and hopes. So the way women's studies departments today will talk about some of the diversity among women's groups, Black feminists will often self-refer to as womanist. So if you see that term in literature, womanist, it's Black feminism, and it's to really acknowledge and respect the intersections, sort of the unique experiences of different groups. Similarly, with other communities, Latinas will often say womanista, with Asian communities, depending on South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian, right? There might be different terms deployed. So Lilian, of course, she's gonna say feminist, right? She doesn't say womanist here. And it's always the author's right to say where she stands. I'm gonna put up another churchy buzzword to help illustrate. Hermeneutics. You may or may not recognize, embedded within this term is the word more or less Hermes. Hermes. And who is Hermes? Anyone happen to know? So in Greek mythology, he's the messenger god. That's where we get that Nike swoosh from. So when we talk about biblical hermeneutics, we're asking ourselves, how is the message delivered? How is the message received by the audience, the readers? How is it interpreted? What is communicating certain points? And we do this practically every single class period. You've already been doing hermeneutics. Most commonly, we use more of like the classical historical hermeneutics, that we approach the Bible as best as we can from a historical lens, a historical point of view, that we benefit when we know something about the world that Jesus was walking in, that we know something about the world that Paul is engaging with, being influenced by. And this can change the way we interpret a scripture passage. The other common, but less so for this class, is a literary approach. So this is where you might refer to a lot of the skills you got in English classes. Is this a simile, a metaphor, allegory, blah, blah, blah? Is the genre poetry? Because if the genre is poetry, I'm going to read that differently than the parts that are presented more as a historical textbook. You know what I'm saying? Right? So the literature can inform the way we take something. Now, when we look at this article, and she's thinking through a feminist lens, a woman's lens, female lens, that is not to say that this interpretation of the Bible is better. This is not to negate the other tools that we use to interpret the Bible. Simply, this is about where do we focus our attention. And she is just interested in parts of the Bible where there are women characters. And what does that say about womanhood? What can we extrapolate when there's the presence of women? Is that meaningful? Now, there's something very interesting about what the Roman Catholic Church has done along these lines. In the past, our older version of the lectionary used to, or we should pause. What's the lectionary? Kind of a refresher.
Is that like in masculine reading stuff, right?
Exactly. It's this book that pre-prescribes what Bible passages we're going to read for that day. So it's assigning, this is the Old Testament reading for Monday. This is the gospel reading for Tuesday. Totally. And it used to be the case that Bible stories where women appeared, the vast majority of that literature would show up on a weekday. How many people go to Mass on a weekday? Right? Like generally not that many. I mean, I'm able to hear every day, but a lot of people don't have that opportunity. And so the Catholic Church said it was very important for the spiritual lives of the congregations to hear more stories about women's experiences. So the revised Standard Common Lectionary, which we use today, more often women are going to appear on Sunday. So I think that's actually pretty cool. It says a lot. And this is, of course, the same lectionary that Orthodox, Lutheran, Episcopalian, and sometimes Methodists follow. So we can be in different denominations, and we're still going to hear the same gospel reading. And I find that really neat. Another way to think about hermeneutics. This is a picture frame. Here's my vase. And now just imagine an explosion of different colorful flowers, right? You might have red, purple, pink, yellow, some green stems. If my frame is red, the red flower is gonna pop, right? The red is gonna draw my eye to notice this more. That's sort of the function of a hermeneutic. It's that frame that orients our gaze. Versus if this is a green frame, then I'm going to be giving more focus to the stems. So again, it's not about changing the picture. The actual picture doesn't change. It's just the framework. And one of the other hermeneutics that Lilian is going to think through is what is called postcolonial. So you see this word colonial, colonialism. We're thinking about colonize or colonize, these kinds of relationships. And this hermeneutic pays extra attention, right? It's extra invested in analyzing power dynamics. Who has power? Where is it consolidated? Why does that person have influence? What kind of influence is it? Is it economic power? Is it social power, religious power, political power? And all of these things can register in different intersections of someone's identity. It can also change over time, right? I gain more power with every degree I receive. Right now I'm able-bodied, but my privilege could change. And so it's something to think about, even in this classroom. What are the power dynamics between teacher-student? I, as someone who gets to design your assessments and grade you, I have that power in a way over your life. But also students are quite powerful. You can organize, you can protest, like complain and get me fired, right? That's like a real exchange. So this is something that we're gonna revisit through Lilian's scholarship. So one of the theories that she proposes through her Tongan lens is round table theory. And she's going to think through this and apply it to Eucharist. Now, of course, it's not specific to her African culture to talk about mealtime, right? Like all cultures have meal times. But in her experience, where mealtime is essential, it's a place of hospitality. It's a place of joyous occasion. It's raucous, right? It's fun. She kind of wants to infuse some of that back into the Eucharistic celebration. Now, what does a circle table communicate? Well, where's the head of the table? right? There is no obvious head of the table. Whereas a more traditional rectangle dining table, it can be more symbolically obvious who's the guest of honor or the host with the most. And this may or may not be in your personal family setting. Maybe like you always rotate seats, it's not really assigned, or whoever sits there, you don't necessarily regard in your family as the most powerful. But if we're talking about space and architecture as a way to communicate power, this is something that's become traditional. So she's trying to think through what this means. How does this affect us spiritually? And could we have a more rich spiritual experience, at least having this mindset, right? It doesn't mean the Eucharistic table needs to turn into an actual circle, but it's a mindset, it's an attitude. So with this, it's aspirational. It aspires to be egalitarian. Does anyone know what egalitarian means? So egalitarian, if I could talk about it in the realm even of marriage, it'd be where both partners have that equal power, kind of that equal say in decision making, kind of equally contributing to the relationship. That egalitarian would be in opposition to hierarchy, right? It's not trying to be hierarchical, but a team. It's kind of like being a team. And Lilian, she's going to critique herself. She knows this is not a perfect system. She knows that. She's going to still ask questions. Is the table big enough? Who's excluded from the table? Who's serving the table? So there's still power dynamics. It doesn't all of a sudden make everyone equal. But instead, what it's striving for is unity, right? It's a unifying moment, but it is not homogeny. It's not sameness. Unity in diversity. Right? You could almost think of the Trinity. The Trinity is what? 3 persons. They're distinct, 3 persons, but one God. Unity in diversity. How? How is this deeply a Roman Catholic idea? How is this already codified in Catholic tradition?
Like concept when they said like Jews and Gentiles, like they can be like they can all be Christians like together, not become Jewish first.
Yeah, so there's something about kind of that tribal ethnic difference, that there's something where we need to really acknowledge real differences. Totally. Yeah, I think it's part of more of like my parents' generation, maybe even your parents' generation, I'm not sure, where there's a lot of movements like, why are we fighting over distances? We're all just the same. Now it's more like, no, we're not the same, we're different. That we should still be dignified and treat each other with full respect, but we have to acknowledge there's real difference. Maybe let me put it a different way. If we're all the same, how would the church change? If we're all the same, how would the church change?
Women could be Christian.
But actually, who cares? Differences don't matter, we're the same. So anyone could aspire to the priesthood. If differences don't matter, right, we're all the same, then who cares who gets married? But the church doesn't say that. The church acknowledges real differences, located in biology even, and makes determinations off of that. But there's still unity. So the church, officially, of course, is going to say, yes, the nun's ministry is just as important as the priest's. They're just as spiritual. You can be just as close to God. The world needs it just as much, but they're called to different work, right? There's that unity, but not sameness. The ministry of the laywoman is just as important as the ministry of the dad, right? To be a parent and raise kids to be Christians is to raise up the church. That is to serve the church, being a doctor versus a chef. So it's all that we all have that potential to be intensely close to God and useful, but it's to different ends. It's in different avenues. Now, there's always a discrepancy between what we're preaching theologically and then what's the reality on the street, right? In reality, a lot of people still treat the priest like the priest is better than everyone, like has this special aura. We could think about it through a US context. In the United States, legally, men and women are equal, right? Legally. But in reality, what's the reality? A lot of women are going to experience sexism. So there's always that mantra, what is proposed, what is the goal, versus how it's played out in real life. The power dynamics. So as we think about the Last Supper, right? This is, what is that, Da Vinci's rendition. I hope this is clear. We have a story that's very male-centric, fine. And actually a part of a feminist hermeneutic is to not only pay attention to stories where women are present, but to have a curiosity about stories where women might not be present, where there's a silence in women's voices. Does that reveal anything? So Lilian is going to be a little playful, right? She's just proposing hypotheses. The Bible leaves so much room to fill in the gaps. And so she's just pondering. It's almost this spiritual mental exercise. Well, the Bible doesn't say women weren't there. I mean, it doesn't say women were there, but it doesn't say they weren't. What could that implicate? Who knows? But what has been tradition is that because the Last Supper is only men, because this is only men, therefore, only men can be priests. Lilian actually wants to use this logic. She actually wants to use this logic and say, by that foundational starting point, we could also say, because it was only men at the Last Supper, maybe women are exempt from Eucharist, right? Maybe I don't ever have to go to communion. Maybe this is a male spiritual discipline and women have other spiritual disciplines. That's the case in other religions, that certain practices are just for men and some are for women. Who knows? So we can still keep this conclusion. We can still keep that end, but we need to know all the ways we got there. If this is a satisfactory logic, and if it's not, we just need to come up with a different logic. But we still need to confront it, because the reality is a lot of people have fought and killed over these questions, and people have left my cherished church because of these issues. And so we need to hear what other people are saying. Speaking of space, she's also going to take some time to talk about safe space. And that's probably something you talked about in other contexts. Is the church a safe space for everyone to be themselves? Right? Is that a safe space for you to be yourself? Is the classroom a safe space to be yourself? Or do you feel like if you share your opinion, you're swimming upstream, right? You're against the current. You could apply this to office corporate culture, right? These cultures. And she's kind of owning up to the fact that I'm not really sure if there can ever fully be a safe space for all people. That someone's feelings are going to be prioritized over others. But thinking through power dynamics, we have to ask the question, who has the privilege to excuse themselves from uncomfortable situations and conversations? Right? This is a private school, right? You can vote with your dollars, vote with your feet. You have other options. It's a little bit, slightly a different story with public school. A little bit harder to get away unless you have the financial means. Versus other people who don't have that privilege, that are still going to be the targets of insults and shame and can't get away from it even if they wanted to. And this reminds me of the Beatitudes. I think that's a pretty common story among most Christians. Are the Beatitudes familiar, right? Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek. So often we read Matthew's version. Luke's version of the Beatitudes has an extension. Not only is there a list of blessings, but Luke says there's a list of curses. Blessed are the poor, woe to you who are rich. Blessed are the hungry, woe to you whose bellies are full. So far, like, I'm in this column, I'm implicated. Like, I can always be full if I want to. Blessed are those who mourn. Woe to you who laugh, right? Like, I know I'm always serious in this class, but I actually like to laugh a lot. So again, I'm still not in a good position. Yes, Jesus comes to provide comfort, right? Jesus comforts the afflicted, but Jesus also afflicts the comfortable. It's not the same good news. It's not the same message for every single demographic. It's prophesied one day the lion is going to dwell with the lamb. Is this a great situation for the lion? It seems like the lion, for the sake of peace, harmony, the lion has to compromise his nature. He can't be who he wants to be. He can't give into his impulses to devour the sheep. He has to share or surrender power. So it's very interesting to think through what's being communicated in the Bible and liturgies through these different perspectives. As we continue reflecting on the Eucharist, we're going to do a similar mental exercise that we already did with baptism, which is, as we considered the stories of Jesus's baptism, right? What did the record say? What does the Bible say about baptism? And now, from the model, what do we keep forever and what is discardable, right? Okay, we got to keep the water. Maybe we don't need full immersion anymore. Maybe it doesn't need to be in a river, but we're going to keep this. That's a very creative, faithful process to kind of identify the core message, the core ingredients, and figure out what else is up for innovation. So here again, when we have these biblical models, what do we keep as eternally true? And what can possibly change?